Been a long time, comrade.
Whoa! Sweet knife, bro! Hey everybody, how's it going? If you notice the Resident Evil 4 hair, that's because today we're talking about Resident Evil 4. Or more specifically, the knives from Resident Evil 4. Or more specifically, Krauser's knife from Resident Evil 4. Or more specifically, we'll be making Krauser's fighting knife from Resident Evil 4. Krauser's knife is one of the most iconic knives in video game history.
More or less.
Unique in both its appearance and style, the Resident Evil 4 remake details it as a one-of-a-kind knife custom-made for fighting. It's both razor-sharp and highly durable. This badass knife is easily one of the fan favorites amongst Resident Evil 4 gamers. Other than that, the only other knife I can think of off the top of my head is the dagger from the Sands of Time. Remember when video games used to be fun? But I'm getting ahead of myself. Today I'm going to show you a cheap and easy way to make this out of this. Let's get started. Here's what you're going to need. Alright, so first thing on the list is wood. If you've watched any of my videos in the past where I make swords, you know I get my wood from Lowe's. In the lumber section, on the bottom shelf, there's a selection of small pre-cut pieces of wood. I just grabbed two of the cheapest ones. They're both different sizes. One's a little thicker, and the other is a thin piece, pretty much the same thing I used for my high frequency sword from the ride-in video. One of each should be more than enough for this build. Next up is the equipment I'll be using to cut the wood, a jigsaw and a Dremel. Now technically, if you really wanted to, you can just use a Dremel, but that would take a lot of time and you'd probably go through a lot of little Dremel bits. The jigsaw made things so much easier in terms of cutting, but it is possible with just a Dremel if that's all you have. It'll just take you a lot longer. Black and silver paint, some paintbrushes, a pencil, and a marker. Now throughout the video you'll see I don't actually use the silver paint. After doing a few layers with the black paint itself, I realized it wasn't going to be enough to mask the details of the wood itself. So I ended up going out and getting a can of primer spray paint along with a can of silver spray paint. Some safety gear. While cutting the wood, you need to have it clamped down, otherwise it'll fly all over the place. These clamps did a really good job at just keeping it still so I can do my cuts accurately and precisely. I've got a pair of safety glasses, because you'll see in the video that there is a lot of wood chips flying all over the place. And you definitely don't want that in your eyes. Another thing that I used that I forgot to put in this picture is a mask. I wore a mask because as you'll see in the video, there is a lot of sawdust and you definitely don't want to breathe that stuff in. Super glue. Again, if you've seen any number of my videos, I use dollar store super glue for almost all my projects. It bonds quickly and it's cheap. What else can I say? And with that, let's get started. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is take the smaller piece and lie it on top of the larger piece of wood. The smaller piece is going to act as the handle that you grip around. So using that, trace up and down the entire piece of the longer wood where you're going to put your handle. For me, I put it right down center, so while working on the details of the blade, I know the proportions next to the handle versus the blade. Once you're done drawing the lines, grip it so you can see how big your hand is going to be, and then measure out how long you want the actual blade to be. I tried to make it as accurate as I could to the actual game, but you can make it a little longer or shorter depending on your taste. Once you got your measurements set, it's time to actually draw the blade itself. Now, there are different ways to do this. I just eyeballed it. I had a picture right in front of me at all times, so I knew what the blade would look like. If you're not feeling too confident, you could always just print a picture of the blade, cut that out, and then put that over and trace over that. But for me, I just found it easier to draw it down by eye while having my hand as reference. I'm doing this part with a pencil, just in case I make any mistakes. While Krauser's knife is cool, it is a little unorthodox in its shape. Once you're done tracing it with a pencil, go over the pencil lines with a marker. For one, it helps you guys see it better when I'm filming this. For two, when I do have my safety glasses on and I am working with the wood machine, there will be dust and little wood chips coming up. These bold black lines make it a lot easier to follow, thus preventing me making any mistakes like cutting too deep into it by accident. Now for this part, I just drew where I thought the metal would become sharpened, thus giving it more of a depth and making it look a little more realistic. Looks pretty good. Now for this, I didn't really know how I was going to make the black handle part of the knife, so I just came up with this little technique. I took paint and went over the lines where I thought the grip handle would be. With the paint still fresh and wet, I placed the other piece of wood over it and pressed down to kind of leave an imprint Since part of the metal knife itself is sticking out at certain parts of the handle, I figured this would probably be the best way to do it. An alternative would be to just cut out the blade itself and then try to figure out measurements using an already cut out portion of the knife. For me, however, this worked out okay. While it didn't look perfect, I was able to fill in the rest. And while it wasn't the smartest way to do it, it came out looking pretty decent. Once you're all done with that, you're ready to start cutting it out. Clamp down the wood and slowly start cutting around the lines you've made. Be careful while using machinery like this, as it is dangerous. While it looks like I'm kneeling right next to the machine, it's just the depth perception of the camera. I'm a decent distance away from it. Again, I'm also wearing glasses, a mask, and I'm in a garage outside with the door wide open to make sure I get as much air ventilation as possible. Slowly but surely, make your way around the blade. Every time you have to make a new cut, you'll probably have to change the positions of the clamps, which is perfectly fine to achieve an optimal cut. Once you've cut it out, congratulations, the hardest part is over. Now, because a jigsaw goes in a straight line for the most part, I wouldn't recommend doing too many bends or curves while working with it. That's where the Dremel comes in. The Dremel makes it a lot easier to get in those little circular spots, allowing me to smoothly get as close as I can to those lines and making it as accurate as I possibly can. Now, on Krauser's knife, there's a little part that's smaller than my Dremel bit, but luckily my Dremel set came with a little kit of different sizes. Most of the time when you buy one of these, it does come with a little kit, so you should have one in there. And now I can get to those hard to reach places. It may look tedious on camera, but there's definitely a level of satisfaction to getting it just the way you want it. And there we go. It's starting to come together already. So this side is what it looks like with the lines, and this side is without. Because I took the time to do the extra smoothing, it looks very closely like a silhouette from the one in the game. Now for the black handle bit. Using the jigsaw, I cut out the shape. Checking it out, I measure it up against the main piece of the knife. To make it fit perfectly with the main part of the knife, I clamp it together and then using the Dremel sand it down to the exact same measurements as the knife itself. And as you know, the grip is on both sides, so I trace out another one using the same piece of wood and cut that out. Again, it doesn't have to be accurate when cutting it out because the Dremel is going to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of making it fit just right. Same deal, I now have all three pieces clamped down so I can get it to fit as nicely as possible. Now, as you know, the grips are going to be a little smooth, so using a piece of sandpaper and the Dremel, I slowly curve the edges that would normally be sharp to give it maximum comfort while gripping it. To smooth it even more, I sand it down. And from the looks of it, it came out looking pretty nice. Now, using the back end that didn't have the lines I drew on, I went with my marker and drew on where I thought the edges of the knife would be. And to get it just right, down the center where I want the two ends to meet, where the sharp part of the blade is, I go right down the center, that way both sides are perfectly centered. Once you're satisfied with it, pull out the Dremel and start sanding it down. Now, while this footage is sped up, I do recommend taking your time. You've come this far and you don't want to have to do this again if you mess up, so just go slowly. Rounding it out might take a while, but it's totally worth it. I took my time making sure not to hit the marker edges that I had made for myself. And while it does take a while, looking at the result really lets me know that it was worth the extra effort. And of course the edges are dull enough that if you were to slice or poke, it doesn't do anything. Now here comes the tricky part. On Krauser's blade, there's a little engraving of a snake. I got a little drill looking bit from my Dremel set, and using a scrap piece of wood, I etched in a snake just as a test run before I did it on the actual knife itself. I did this to make sure the wood wouldn't chip or splint. Seeing how everything worked out, I'm ready for the real deal. Taking a look at the snake insignia on Krauser's knife, it's kind of shaped in a W. Once I have a rough sketch of it with the pencil, I go over it with a black marker. Looks pretty close to the one in game. Once again, I'll remind you, that you've put in a lot of effort up until this point, so when you start engraving, make sure to take your time. Follow the lines and don't apply too much pressure. You only need a light engraving for it to show up. Any sort of defect will stick out, so just make sure you take your time. Now if for any reason you do mess up, there is something called wood filler. It's kind of like a band-aid for these kind of situations, but it's best to just take your time so nothing happens. And here we are, it came out looking pretty decent. Once we're done with all that, it's time to paint it. Clear out a space and get ready to paint. I did a base coat on the little handle parts, and decided to do a base coat on the knife itself as well. I did about 3 coats of paint for each side. However, despite that, when I took a look at it, you could still see all the details in the wood itself. And if I was supposed to have a knife that came out looking shiny and metallic, I had to bite the bullet and buy the spray paint. 1 thing of primer and 1 thing of metallic. Now I feel like I've talked about this in prior videos, but primer acts like a thickening coat. The more coats you lay on, the thicker the layers get, thus hiding any imperfections or unwanted details. The way I did it is I sprayed on 1 coat of primer spray paint every 30 minutes, and I did this 3 times. When it was time to flip it over, I waited roughly an hour just to give it extra time. The last thing you want to do is have the paint dry up and then stick to whatever surface you're working on. And well, the results speak for themselves. It came out looking a lot nicer and no more of those weird wood details. Once you're satisfied, go ahead and spray down the main part of the knife with your silver spray paint. Once I've done that 3 times, test it out and flip it over. Same rules apply. 30 minutes apart, and then I wait about an hour before flipping it over. While I was waiting for the metallic silver spray paint to dry, I took the 2 handle parts back in the house and did a layer of the black brush paint again on it. While the primer looks great, you'll notice on Krauser's blade that it isn't one thick piece of metal in between. There seems to be some sort of cover where his fingers would be gripping. Now you don't necessarily have to do this, but I decided to just to make it as accurate to the game as possible. After the long-awaited drying, my silver blade is finally ready. Looks pretty good too. All that's left now is to glue the metallic knife part to the handle. Once I apply the glue, I press down on it, and then using my finger, run it along where my fingers would be gripping to make sure it's as smooth as possible along those lines. Then, flip it over and repeat the process for the other side. This time I want to make sure so I'm looking at it instead of having it aimed towards the camera. After about a minute or 2, I can pick it up and play with it. And it came out looking awesome too. Now you can stop here if you want, but like I said, there's that black grippy part that covers part of the blade. So for kicks, I decided to fill that in with the black paint. And while I was making it look as accurate as I could to the game, I kind of regretted doing it. So I'll leave this as an optional part for you to decide. But if you decide to do it, go along the lines of the actual grip part. When the metal starts to protrude where the handle ends, that's where you stop painting. I did my standard 3 layers of paint. This one dried a lot faster. Maybe 10 minutes of waiting for every layer that I put on. Something like that. But once it's done drying, we're all set. Let's take a look at how it came out. And well, there you have it. Krauser's fighting knife. You know, I always thought this was a cool knife, and finally I have my own. It really is a pretty simple build. It's just 3 pieces when you think about it. The main metal part, and then the handle. The hardest thing really would be to just, you know, shape it out and then cut it out. But once you've done that, the rest comes pretty easy. And it's pretty cheap too, all things considered. You know, I used 2 pieces of wood. They were both about $2 each, so that's $4. Each can of spray paint was about $5. So rounding up, I'm gonna say it's about $15. And let's just say some miscellaneous items that you might need. Let's say $20. $20 build, you know. I did it in about a day and a half, mostly because I had to wait for the paint to dry. That was a real pain in the ass. But if you're going through a convention or something like that, this will definitely be fine to go through weapons check, you know. Really, it doesn't, well, really cool, sleek design. I couldn't be happier with it. I'm gonna hang it up on the wall for the next episode. Speaking of which, I guess I'm back. We'll see how long that lasts. But that's gonna do it for me today. If you like what you saw, comment down below and let me know what you would like to see me do next. Otherwise, I will see you on the next one.